What if I told you that the timeline making you feel like a failure right now was never even real? Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll never look at your own behind-schedule life the same way again. There was a man named Daniel who turned 30 on a Tuesday, alone in his apartment, eating cold noodles from a box he'd forgotten to heat up. He didn't notice the silence. He didn't notice the bare walls. He was scrolling through photos of people he went to college with. A wedding here, a new house there, a promotion announcement, a baby announcement, a "we're so blessed" caption under a photo of a family standing in front of a brand new car. And Daniel sat there in his small rented apartment with his ordinary job and his ordinary bank account. And he felt something settle into his chest like a stone. A single word kept repeating in his mind: behind. He was behind. Everyone else had figured it out. Everyone else was moving forward on some invisible track, hitting their marks right on schedule, and somehow he had missed the train. He didn't even remember it leaving the station. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept doing the math in his head. By 30, you're supposed to have a career. By 30, you're supposed to have savings. By 30, you're supposed to be settled, maybe married, maybe a homeowner, maybe already thinking about kids. He had none of that. And the worst part wasn't the lack of those things. The worst part was the feeling that he'd failed some test nobody had ever actually shown him. The next morning, he went to work feeling heavier than usual. His coworker, an older woman named Priya, who'd been at the company for almost 20 years, noticed something was off. "You look like you lost an argument with your pillow," she said, only half joking. Daniel laughed weakly and told her about his birthday, about the photos, about the feeling that he was falling behind in life while everyone else was racing ahead. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Daniel would think about for the rest of his life. "Behind what exactly?" Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" "Behind everyone. Behind the normal pace of things." Priya smiled, but it wasn't a mocking smile. It was the smile of someone who had clearly had this exact thought before, a long time ago, and had come out the other side of it. "Let me ask you something," she said. "Whose race are you running?" Now, here's where it gets interesting, because Priya told Daniel something that most people never stop to consider. She said, "When you were a kid, did anyone hand you a piece of paper that said, 'By this age, you should have this job, this house, this relationship, and these savings?'" Daniel shook his head. So where did the schedule come from? And that question just hung there in the air. Because the truth is, none of us were ever given an actual schedule. There's no rule book, no official document that says you need to be married by 28, or have a six-figure salary by 32, or own property by 35. Nobody handed you that paper because it doesn't exist. So where does this feeling of behind come from? It comes from comparison. It comes from glancing sideways at other people's lives, usually the curated, filtered, highlight reel version of those lives, and quietly building an average in your head. An average made up of the people who got married young, the people who inherited money, the people who got lucky with timing, the people who simply chose a different path entirely. You take all of that, blend it together, and somehow it becomes normal. It becomes the bar. And then you measure yourself against a bar that was never anything more than a mashup of other people's individual stories, Priya put it simply. You're not behind, Daniel. You're just not running their race, and you never were. Now, if this idea is hitting you the way it hit Daniel, if you've ever felt that quiet panic of being 30 or 35 or even 40 and feeling like you should have more by now, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. Not because I need it, but because somewhere out there, someone else needs to hear this exact message today, and the algorithm works in mysterious ways. Okay, back to Daniel. That conversation didn't fix everything overnight. That's not how this works, and I'm not going to pretend it is. But it planted something. A small crack of light in a wall that had felt very solid. Over the next few months, Daniel started paying attention to something he'd never noticed before. He started noticing how many people's success stories had pieces missing. The friend who bought a house at 25, down payment from his parents, the coworker who got promoted so fast. She'd been working unpaid overtime for years and burned out within 18 months. The couple who seemed to have it all, they were drowning in debt to keep up appearances. Everyone's timeline had context that never made it into the photo. And here's the thing about Daniel. He didn't have rich parents. He didn't have connections. He didn't have a head start. What he did have, it turned out, was something most people overlook completely. He had time. Real time. The kind of time you only get when you're not constantly sprinting to catch up with an imaginary deadline. So instead of forcing himself into someone else's mold, Daniel did something almost radical. He stopped apologizing. He stopped saying, "I'm still figuring it out," with that embarrassed half laugh. He stopped deflecting questions about his life with self-deprecating jokes. He stopped measuring his Tuesdays against other people's highlight reels. Instead, he asked himself a much simpler question. Not, "Where should I be by now?" but "What do I actually want to build?" That question changed everything. Daniel had always been quietly fascinated by woodworking. As a teenager, he used to fix up old furniture he found on the side of the road, just for fun. But furniture guy didn't fit anywhere on the timeline he'd been measuring himself against, so he'd buried it for over a decade. At 30, with nothing to lose and no schedule left to chase, he picked it back up. Just as a hobby at first, evenings and weekends in a tiny garage workshop, sanding, sawing, learning from mistakes nobody was watching him make. There was no 5-year plan, no milestone chart, just curiosity and the quiet relief of doing something simply because it felt right, not because it was due. A year later, he posted a single restored cabinet online, almost as an afterthought. Someone offered to buy it. Then, someone else asked if he took commissions. 2 years after that conversation with Priya, Daniel was running a small but genuinely thriving custom furniture business. Not because he followed a timeline, but because he finally stopped running someone else's race and started walking his own. Was it the house, the marriage, the promotion he'd seen in those photos years ago? No. It was something better, because it was actually his, built from his own curiosity, on his own clock, for reasons that made sense to him. Here's what Daniel eventually understood, and what I want you to walk away with today. Behind only exists when you're measuring yourself against a race that was never officially yours to run. The moment you stop comparing your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 20. The pressure doesn't just lessen, it disappears entirely, because the comparison itself was the illusion. There is no universal schedule for a life. There never was. The only schedule that matters is the one you decide to write for yourself. Starting today. Starting exactly where you are. So if you've been feeling behind, feeling late, feeling like everyone else got the memo and you didn't, I want you to remember Daniel. I want you to remember that question Priya asked him. Whose race are you running? If you made it this far, you already know the answer. So drop a comment and tell me, what's the one thing you've been putting off because you thought it was too late to start? I'd genuinely love to know. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe, because next week's story might be the one that changes everything for someone you love.